For a long time, I believed financial success was a destination, a place you arrived at once you learned the right strategies, earned enough money, or discovered the perfect system. I read books looking for answers, formulas, shortcuts, but the more I read, the more a subtle truth began to surface, one that no chart could show and no spreadsheet could calculate. The real transformation never started with money. It started with how I thought about money. And the books that changed my financial life did so not by giving me better tactics, but by forcing uncomfortable shifts in my mindset. The first shift was realizing that money is not a measure of intelligence or worth. This idea appears quietly but persistently in books like The Psychology of Money. I had grown up believing that people who were good with money were simply smarter, more disciplined, or somehow different from the rest of us. But the books dismantled that myth with unsettling clarity. Financial outcomes are driven far more by behavior than by intellect. Smart people make terrible financial decisions every day, while ordinary people quietly build wealth by managing their emotions and expectations. This realization was humbling and freeing. It meant financial success was not reserved for a gifted few. It was accessible to anyone willing to work on themselves. Another profound shift came when I stopped seeing money as something to be controlled and started seeing it as something to be respected. Books like Your Money or Your Life reframed every dollar as stored time, stored energy, stored life. Spending was no longer neutral. It was a trade. And once you understand that, impulsive consumption loses its appeal. The question stops being, can I afford this? And becomes, is this worth my life? That single shift changed how I spent, saved, and valued what I already had. Then came the realization that wealth grows slowly and that this slowness is not a flaw, but a feature. Before reading deeply, I was impatient. I wanted visible progress. I wanted results that confirmed I was doing things right. But books like The Simple Path to Wealth and The Millionaire Next Door taught me that compounding is not just a mathematical process, it is a psychological test. It rewards patience, consistency, and the ability to endure boredom. Most people fail not because their plan is wrong, but because they cannot stay with it long enough. Accepting slowness as part of the process removed a tremendous amount of pressure. I stopped trying to accelerate results and started trying to sustain behavior. One of the most difficult mindset shifts was letting go of comparison. Wealth books repeatedly warn that comparing your financial life to others is not just unhelpful, it is dangerous. You never see the full picture. You see lifestyles, not balance sheets. You see consumption, not security. Once I understood that, the urge to keep up lost its power. Books taught me that wealth is what you don't see. It is the margin, the buffer, the flexibility to say no. And when you internalize that, flashy success becomes far less impressive than quiet stability. Another shift came from understanding the role of luck and risk. Before reading deeply, I believed success was mostly earned and failure was mostly deserved. Wealth books challenge this belief gently but firmly. They show how randomness, timing, and circumstance play a far larger role than we like to admit. This does not excuse irresponsibility, but it introduces humility. It teaches you to avoid arrogance in success and despair in failure. This mindset shift changed how I took risks. I stopped betting everything on single outcomes and started building resilience instead. Survival became the goal, not perfection. Books also forced me to confront my relationship with debt, not as a moral failing, but as a structural reality. Debt is not just money owed, it is future flexibility surrendered. This understanding didn't make me fearful. It made me intentional. I learned to ask not just whether debt could be managed, but what it would prevent me from doing later. Freedom, I realized, is often invisible until it is gone. That shift made long-term thinking feel urgent rather than abstract. Perhaps the most transformative shift was realizing that financial success is deeply personal. There is no universal right path. Books that endure do not prescribe identical outcomes. They encourage alignment. Alignment between values and spending, between goals and behavior, between risk tolerance and strategy. I stopped asking, what is the best investment? And started asking, what is the best decision for the kind of life I want to live? That question changed everything. It turned money from a scorecard into a tool. Over time, these mindset shifts began to compound. I noticed that money caused less anxiety. Decisions felt calmer. Progress felt steadier. Not because I had mastered finance, but because I had stopped fighting myself. The books didn't eliminate uncertainty, they taught me how to live with it. They didn't promise control, they offered perspective. And perspective, I learned, is one of the most valuable financial assets you can acquire. As I look back on the lessons absorbed from years of reading, one conclusion stands out. Financial success is less about learning new information and more about unlearning harmful beliefs. Beliefs about speed, comparison, certainty, and self-worth. The books that matter most do not shout, they whisper. They invite reflection. They change how you see risk, time, and yourself. And once your mindset shifts, behavior follows naturally, quietly, almost without resistance. This is where the real work begins, not with opening an account or choosing an asset, but with noticing the stories you tell yourself about money. Stories about what is possible. Stories about what you deserve. Stories about who you are allowed to become. Because every financial outcome is downstream from those stories. And once you learn to question them, to reshape them with patience and honesty, you begin to experience a different relationship with money altogether. One built not on fear or urgency, but on clarity, resilience, and trust in the long arc of progress. And it is precisely at this point where mindset becomes the foundation rather than an afterthought that the deeper shifts reveal themselves, showing how financial success stops being something you chase and becomes something you grow into, slowly and deliberately, as the person you are becoming learns to think, decide, and live in a way that money can finally support rather than control. And that is where the next part of this story truly begins. Unfolding gently like unfolding, gently like a curtain, lifting at dawn, revealing that the most powerful changes were never dramatic, only deliberate. And this is where the mindset shifts I learned from books stopped being ideas and started becoming a way of living. One of the deepest realizations came when I understood that financial success is not about eliminating fear, but about learning to act responsibly in its presence. Before, fear meant stop. It meant delay. It meant retreat into overthinking. But the books taught me that fear is not a signal to freeze, it is a signal to slow down, gather perspective, and proceed with intention. Wealthy thinkers do not wait to feel fearless. They build systems that allow progress even when doubt lingers. This shift alone changed my relationship with opportunity. I stopped asking whether I felt ready and started asking whether the risk was survivable. Closely tied to this was the shift from outcome obsession to process trust. I used to measure financial progress emotionally, checking results constantly, tying my confidence to short-term movement. Books quietly dismantled that habit. They showed me that the most dangerous thing you can do with money is watch it too closely without understanding time. Progress that matters is often invisible for long stretches. Once I embraced this, I felt lighter. I could focus on repeating good decisions instead of monitoring results. The relief was profound. I was no longer negotiating with my future every day. I was building it patiently. Another mindset shift arrived when I stopped viewing discipline as restriction and began seeing it as self-care. Budgets, rules, limits, these once felt like cages. But wealth books reframe them as boundaries that protect energy, attention, and peace. Discipline was no longer something imposed on me. It was something I chose to preserve what mattered. This subtle reframing made consistency sustainable. I wasn't depriving myself, I was prioritizing myself. Then there was the shift around identity. Books taught me that money follows identity more reliably than intention. When I thought of myself as someone trying to be good with money, my behavior was fragile. When I began to see myself as someone who plans, who waits, who thinks long term, my actions followed naturally. This identity-based shift removed the constant negotiation with temptation. Good decisions felt aligned rather than forced. And alignment, I learned, is the quiet engine of long-term success. Over time, I also learned to make peace with uncertainty. No book promised certainty, and that was the point. Instead, they taught adaptability. They showed me that resilience matters more than prediction, that flexibility outlasts confidence, and that preparing for a range of outcomes is wiser than betting on one. This mindset reduced anxiety dramatically. I no longer needed to be right. I only needed to be prepared. Perhaps the most human shift of all was redefining what enough meant. Before, enough was always ahead of me, just beyond the next milestone. But books like The Psychology of Money revealed how dangerous that moving target can be. When you never define enough, no amount of progress feels safe. Learning to recognize efficiency didn't kill ambition, it stabilized it. It allowed growth without desperation, effort without obsession. It replaced hunger with direction. As these mindset shifts settled in, I noticed a quiet change in how money occupied my thoughts. It became less dominant, less emotional. It moved from the foreground of my life to the background, where it could quietly do its job. And that, paradoxically, is when it became most powerful. Money stopped demanding attention and started providing support. Looking back, the most valuable lesson the books taught me was this: financial success is not something you achieve and then relax into. It is something you grow into by becoming a different thinker, a calmer thinker, a longer-term thinker, a more honest thinker. The numbers eventually follow, but only after the mindset has changed. And this is the quiet ending of the story. Not a breakthrough, not a windfall, but a transformation. A realization that the real work was never about finding the perfect strategy, but about reshaping the lens through which I viewed money, time, risk, and myself. Once that lens changed, progress stopped feeling like a struggle and started feeling like momentum. If this reflection resonated with you, take a moment to notice which belief about money might be quietly shaping your decisions right now. Share that insight. Sometimes awareness alone begins the shift. And if you want to keep exploring how mindset, psychology, and long-term thinking create real financial stability, stay connected. Subscribe, follow, and return. Because the most powerful financial changes don't arrive suddenly, they unfold slowly from the inside out as you become the kind of person your future can trust.